You're entering the Facilicast, the liberal science of buildings, with your host, Jim Zerbel.
Hey folks, welcome back to the Facilicast, the liberal science of buildings with Jim Zerbel. I am so pleased today to have Steve Abercrombie. Steve is the faculty coordinator for sustainable building science technology at South Seattle Community College. Am I right about that?
Yes, you are.
Oh, I'm so pleased about it. At least I got it the first time. So, Steve, welcome on the Facilicast. We're honored to have you today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Oh, thanks so much for having me today. So, my background, I have been in this industry for almost 20 years and started my career as a consultant, started working on buildings and started trying to figure out how can we make buildings better, really focused on energy efficiency and sustainability, looking at buildings have an outsized impact on our lives and on the world. And so had an opportunity to work all around the world with a bunch of amazing designers trying to make those buildings better. Got really involved at that point with the leadership in energy and environmental design system, and got to be kind of on the ground floor working with the design and then the operational implementation of making those buildings better. And loved doing that. Went from a place where I was working individually to leading a team and working across the country with a lot of repeat builders, trying to figure out how can we operationalize process and do the things we do more and more. But kept searching for more impact. And, it kind of gets to why am I trying to make this? Well, I like to make things work better. And I'm kind of one of those tinkerers or fixers. So started getting into the technologies in our buildings and finding that we weren't getting the newer technologies implemented, tested, and deployed for a long enough time. So I worked with how can we get those new technologies in faster, find out what works, find out what doesn't, and keep them operating because we're making a lot of investment on the capital side and always kind of running into hiccups where I talk to operations folks and they'd say, why'd you saddle me with this thing and why doesn't it work anymore? And had a really good run at that. But through this whole time, my passion's teaching, my passion's working with people. And I spent my evenings after a long day consulting or after a long day as a program manager, going and teaching night classes. And after quite a while, after almost a decade of doing that, had the opportunity to step in and take over a pretty innovative bachelor program where we teach folks that have been in industry, that have a background, that have worked in the trades, that have operated buildings, a set of skills where they can go ahead and make a difference with people and with buildings. And so I stepped into becoming the faculty coordinator for the Sustainable Building Science Technology program. And I also, still lacking a night job working all the time, have taken on an opportunity to teach in the Building Operator Certification Program. That's a nationwide certification program teaching people energy efficient building operations. And so that's really what I do now. I get to work with an incredible number of folks all across the country, working with them of how do we take these increasingly complex buildings that we're working with and make them run better? And how do we make them better for people? And how do we make them better for the planet? And hopefully at the same time, how do we have a little bit of fun doing so?
That's a great response and a great kind of explanation of what you've been involved in and how you kind of arrived at this at South Seattle Community College. And why don't you talk a little bit more about that baccalaureate degree, because I found that very interesting as well.
Yeah, so Washington State is a pretty interesting, is an innovator in this space in a lot of ways. That we realize that we have a number of leading Research One and other institutes of higher education that are doing great work with architecture, with engineering, with other things, training folks for the workforce. What we were finding is we're growing rapidly and we have a huge demand for professions that are not necessarily being served by a traditional engineering degree or a traditional architecture degree. And one of those, a little over a decade ago, we realized is sustainable building, kind of that convergence that we have of rapidly increasing opportunities and needs around information technology. And then also the needs of demands of increasing policy drivers around our buildings needing to become more and more energy efficient. one unique fact that a lot of folks don't know. Energy is really, really cheap up here in the Northwest because we have lots of hydro dams. It's also low carbon in its generation. But the thing is, we've lacked the ability to have new generation capacity for a long period of time. Really, for 40 years, we've been living off energy efficiency. And so that has driven a need for us to really clamp down as we're seeing massive growth in our region and people wanting to be here for a variety of reasons. We don't have an ability just to crank up and make more energy. We have to find that energy from efficiency. So that convergence of rapid innovation occurring in information technology, information systems, and data with lots of new buildings coming in, lots of new people coming in, but needing to harness those two trends and be able to run our buildings leaner, cleaner, and better was the genesis for this baccalaureate degree. And so we have the ability to, with our traditional community colleges, work with folks that have an associate degree and go ahead and help train them up at a point in their career when they're maybe looking for the next thing. Maybe the tool belt's getting a little heavy, knees are getting a little creaky, or they want to maybe make a career change and they can come into our institution, work with us in a work compatible function. So we teach one Saturday per month. We teach in a hybrid manner. Another thing about Seattle, it's impossible to get across the city. So we don't ask people to show up on a Wednesday night after a long day. They get to go home, they get to log onto their computer even before COVID, do that work with us. We're there and we're supporting them. But then 2 to 3 years of study, they're able to take a range of classes and come out with a new degree in sustainable building science technology. And we've been really lucky. When they do that, they find a job because there's a huge amount of demand for folks in that space. And so we get them out into the workplace doing really cool stuff.
You know, I find it really interesting how you shared that in the Northwest, that there's a great deal of energy efficiency that is derivative of the electrical environment, the energy environment that you live in. Whereas in most of the rest of the United States, for every building that's being improved, for every building that's going up, for every building that is already efficient, there's 100 buildings that are just sitting there. And I often wax about that, so I'll kind of cut this one short. So I find it really interesting in how your area of the country has really gone green because the capacity is what the capacity is, and efficiency is what allows you to build and grow more. Really interesting.
Absolutely. And the other comment I'll make is we're piloting this new thing in a number of different municipalities and in our state that are called building performance standards. And this is really driving a lot of interest in our degree and other certifications like the building operator certification, that we are now looking at legislatively, our buildings actually have to operate under a certain energy target year over year. And they've got to report it and first report it and then operate under it. And if they're not able to do that, either on an energy or greenhouse gas basis, they're going to pay a fine until they can come into compliance. And so we need a skilled workforce to be able to do that. And that's really where we're focusing a lot of our training, because we have a shortage of folks that kind of know those intricacies, right? It's you got to know the technology, you got to know the operations, you got to know the people to make it happen.
Yeah, that is, and of course, that is a big challenge that we spend a lot of time talking about. Here is where is the talent coming from? Where is it going to? And we're also aware that U.S. Green Building Council is really attuned to this, because it's one thing to have a certification for a lead O&M certification, but it's quite another thing to manifest it and put it into play and operation across the country. That's a big deal, and I hope that the students and of all sorts and ilks that come into that realm are well compensated and will be in time very happy with the role that they have played, particularly with these new performance standards rolling out. We can legislate all we want, but what we don't want, and I think all of us are attuned to this, we certainly don't want an unfunded mandate. We want the talent to be there, lest less building owners go, well, this is all good and fine, and I'd like to save energy, but there's nobody to do the work. Yeah, that's a big deal, and honored that you're really spearheading a great deal of that work. So why don't you tell us a couple things unique about yourself?
Well, I wrestle a little with this question because I'm not sure if I'm unique, particularly as I talk to folks in our industry. I don't know many people that came about in seventh grade and went to that guidance counselor, and the guidance counselor said, you know, your skills are going to have you as a facility manager or a building operator, or they saw a really cool movie on at the theater and said, oh, well, that's what I want to be when I grow up. And I can't say that that was my path either, but most people, when I talk with them, in professional circles, they think I'm an engineer. I have a background as a commissioning provider. So I have a background kind of going into the nitty gritty, structuring, figuring stuff out, and troubleshooting. And so when I talk to people, they often say, you're an engineer, aren't you? And what kind of makes me unique is I'm not an engineer. I'm not an architect. I have a liberal arts degree. I started my career in technology. And then I got a master's degree in environmental science. So I have kind of all these different lobes. I'm really a generalist, and I do bring that deep technical understanding. I really love the intersection of building control systems and mechanical HVAC, lighting, plumbing equipment. But then I abstract that into what's the big picture? What are we trying to solve? What are the different perspectives we have on the team? And how do we bring that together to find the root cause, troubleshoot, and make it happen? And then for me, it ultimately is about the education. I think a story about me is from my technology background. If you ask me to go ahead and do the Bart Simpson thing and write something 50 times on a chalkboard, even if it would take me 5 minutes to do that, I'll sit down for 5 hours and write a computer program so I only have to do it once. And so that's probably where my education comes in. I want to teach people how we don't have to repeat the same mistake. And so I want to figure out the root cause. I want to work with folks to troubleshoot, and then I want to teach everybody so we don't have to be in that same spot again tomorrow.
Love that answer. And that represents something that is unique, and that is not necessarily a task that everyone necessarily adheres to. So that's pretty interesting. Willing to do it once, but engineer a system allowing the other 49 times to occur. Thank you, Bart. Okay. Let's talk about myths and misconceptions. So you want to share any common myths that you're aware of in this space and how they relate?
Yeah, for me, one of the biggest myths that I spend a lot of time trying to dispel is that resource efficiency or sustainability necessarily costs money. Done right, in my experience, it's always more cost effective in the long term to take the efficient and sustainable approach. You know, it was an old saying that I heard a lot from folks growing up, and that's do it right or do it twice. And I think that there's a lot of things that happen, right? And we really do need to take the time to find win-win decisions or find something we can do that has the planning and has a stacked function. It serves multiple purposes. And so oftentimes we end up kind of rushing into a decision, or we end up possibly cutting corners. Sometimes we just throw money at a solution. And, you know, I see, unfortunately, a lot of the time, this is how vendors can really profit from the approaches that we see. And so what I really try to do is to focus on teaching people to slow down, find that root cause of the problem, define what the outcome we're looking for, get the team on board, and then move forward. And throughout my career, I've found when we do that, we can find solutions that are the most resource and cost effective. They're not always the obvious ones. Oftentimes, they're the old wisdom ones, right? Oftentimes, they're the ones where the folks on the ground, the folks closest to it, know that solution, but you got to spend a little time eliciting it. When I worked in consulting, we always involved our operations teams, and we always brought somebody in and I was a sustainability guy in the room. And I had somebody come in and he sat in the back of the room like this. And they weren't having any of it because they'd heard this before and it was going to make their life difficult. And my job was to say, how can I make your life easier and at the same time get to the outcome I'm looking for? And when we unlocked that time and time again, that's what we found. We made operation process a little bit better. And they had a great idea about how to save energy, save labor in doing it. And that's where we got the cost savings. And then we were able to get whatever the environmental or social outcome we were looking for in a partnership. And, an example I see time and time again, we often add a risk factor to stuff. We often oversize our HVAC system, and then we add 10%, and then we add another 10%. And by that point, we have a system that, except on the absolute hottest or coldest day of the year, is never running at an optimal phase. So we spend a bunch of extra money on equipment, and we spend a bunch of extra money maintaining a system. It's always kind of ramping way too fast up, shutting way too fast down, and overcooling the space. So by right-sizing that system, we're able to go ahead and get the win-win out of it. We use less energy, it runs more effectively, and we're not constantly chasing down where things blasting people with cold air inside the space.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I was thinking about, as you were kind of talking about changes that need to be made and where the rubs might be. And as you had mentioned, the new building standards that are out there, changes that somehow we need to come up to are, as we talked about, the talent there, but also that in creating these requirements, that there be some sort of carrot involved, where there is some sort of that it becomes more of a gift rather than a potential penalty. That'll be interesting. Along with that, are there other particular changes that you think ought to be, that you would like to see in this, we'll call it quasi industry, in the built environment, that you think will make a major and healthy impact on that?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of things we can do, right? I often say that the built environment's in an interesting place because it's the intersection of several very, very conservative industries. When you look at it from a perspective of finance, you look at it from a perspective of insurance, and you look at it from a perspective of construction. And the changes that we're seeing in some of those industries, I think, are going to drive some previously unknown things in our industry over the coming decade. For me, when it really comes down to it, the realization, automation is here, and automation is going to change the way we do things. But as I see it, I think there's often an assumption that folks say that automation is going to lead to less smart folks doing jobs. And I think it's absolutely the opposite. As our buildings are getting smarter, as we're getting more intricate and intertwined systems, we need smarter and smarter folks that have more and more skills, right? They need to have the technological skills, they need to have the people skills, and they need to understand kind of the depth of these intricate and intersecting building systems in order to be able to do what we're asking for from our buildings.
Yeah, okay. Now I would agree with that. I'm going to echo that sentiment that today's anyone under the age of 18 was born with an iPad in their hand, and so while all previous generations, we had toolboxes and technology got thrown in the toolbox, and once in a while we'd pull it out like a tool. However, that's one of the things that I'm particularly most excited about. And of course, we're involved in running the Facilithon program for high school students that are these students, and they have innate technical abilities because these are literally, this is the air they breathe, the water they swim in. And so when we talk about these challenges where previous generations either took the tough guy road or the ivory tower road and said, this is a barrier to entry, or you're going to hate this job. Now we have these new generations of green leaning, tech native students that these young adults will be able to handle that. And I think we also agree that we have yet in history to see how automation or mechanization or AI ever caused there to be fewer people working. There's always more people coming in, aren't there?
There absolutely are. And I think it's, for me, it is one of the most exciting things about buildings as well, is it's always going to be that the intersection of the information technology of AI, but that with mechanical and physical systems, we're always working with things that we're going to need to touch and feel to some degree. And so I find that exciting. And then you bring in the people element, because the thing I'm always telling my students and always working with folks on is we have these buildings here because of people. Without the people in them, there's no reason for the buildings. And so, I think I'm really optimistic about the future when we see those things.
Yeah, and with that, thinking about the tone of others speaking, what media channels are you on? Where are you getting your messaging? Where are you listening these days? Tell me about that.
How many hours do you have to talk about that?
I don't know.
I'll call out a few. I'm kind of, being a generalist, I'm really a broad media consumer. So a few of the ones that are really, really high signal and noise for me. One is Nexus by James Dice, and that's about smart buildings. And he's just been doing an incredible job. I've been an early subscriber, took some of his courses, and he's bringing a lot of value to what's a crazy fast moving industry, still with a lot of vaporware out there. And he and his community are doing a fantastic job kind of cutting through that and really helping with the next generation of smart buildings and smart building operations.
That's interesting.
I think that the Interstate Renewable Energy Council is doing some interesting stuff with workforce and workforce development. They're serving as an aggregator for a lot of job pathways and job definitions, and also national work that's being done. And with the amount of money that's coming down from recent investments in bipartisan infrastructure and the Inflation Reduction Act, having clear national folks that are talking about how the coordination is happening on the workforce side, I see a lot of interesting work coming from them. An old stalwart in my industry is the ACEEE, or the American Council on the Energy Efficient Economy. And they produce some really, really high quality research reports and other work that if I need to cuddle up with a good long white paper, that's a place I'm going to go just to know that I'm getting some really good quality research.
I love it. Thanks for sharing with that. Is there a recurring message that you would like to espouse over and over again and over again?
Well, I think this is where I have to adopt the bias, but it's about more education. And I think that it's about the change in education, where it used to kind of be, you might go get a degree or go get a trade training or go through an apprenticeship, and then you just kind of cruise, right? You do that and then you work for 30 years. And now I think that the nature of education is changing, where we're coming up to tune that up every few years, right? They're saying that, our technical information is doubling every couple of years. And so, it's replacing itself so fast. We've got to become lifelong learners. And that's kind of the recurrent message for me is, in order to stay relevant, people have more jobs in their lives, and they've got to become lifelong learners in order to be able to, either stay current or take on whatever the next job or next career looks like.
Yeah, relevance is something that everyone should not just aspire to, but act on a regular basis through any one of the number of manners that they can do so, including South Seattle Community College, actually. Tell me something else. What's your why? Is there something that serves as your primary inspiration that you can point to and say, this is why I am who I am?
Well, it's a more recent why for me, but it's pretty easy to contextualize. I'll just a little bit of background. I came up as an environmentalist. I have a degree in environmental science, right? So I really care about the fundamental life support systems for humans, right? I think that if we don't treat the things we get for free well enough, we can't engineer ourselves out or pay for those things that provide us the basic functions of life. And so, but my why now is I have a 7.5-year-old kid, and I could go back to the environmental picture of doom and gloom, right? And you can get that anytime you want to turn on the news.
Sure.
But for me, I'm highly optimistic. I think this forthcoming generation, they've got a big challenge, but with that big challenge, their innovation and the opportunity is just huge. And so, my why is to watch, is to be able to sit back and watch this generation that is admittedly facing the challenge, but take that head on. And I'm seeing them do it to solve these problems with some amazing tools that folks have been working on. And I think they're really going to be able to use that human ingenuity to address them. And so that is my why, is to know that in 40 years, my 7-year-old is going to be in a place where life is good, and we've turned the corner to solving some of these big gnarly problems, and we're having fun doing it.
Yeah, big and gnarly, but I would also agree, as you kind of indicated here, we can spend our entire time talking about doom and gloom, and we're never going to sell a record, right? So I think there's merit in sharing these messages in a number of different forms. I've talked to a number of other individuals about that concept of, do you want your own injury? Are you a patriot for that? I think it's worthwhile, and recognizing that a political slant has no place in how can I make my world better. Okay, I think that's good. Why don't you tell us a couple other things here? Are there places that our listeners can find you? Can you tell us about that? And we'll also be sure to post that at the end of our cast today.
Yeah, certainly. I'm probably most active on LinkedIn. That's the of the places where it's best for professional folks to find me. I tend to post what's going on, what I'm doing. I share information, a lot of jobs. Also, sustainable building science technology. The program, we have a pretty active LinkedIn community, and are talking and sharing a lot about these jobs. And it's the interesting part. We're not producing enough graduates to fill these jobs. So it's the great part for our graduates. They walk out of our program and stick up a hand, and there's plenty of people fighting for them. So those are kind of the key areas. I'm on other social media. I know Sustainable Building Science Technology is both. We're on the Meta platforms like Facebook and Insta, but those are kind of the best places. Also, our website has kind of information about our program if folks are kind of interested in what we're doing.
That sounds really good, Steve. And I wanted to bring something up. You and I had some conversation in the past about the BEST network. What is that acronym? And tell us a little bit about BEST.
Yes. So I think BEST, the acronym is, I think it's Building Energy for a Sustainable Tomorrow. I think I'm getting that right. And it's a long-term coordinated network that has been funded by the National Science Foundation. And the National Science Foundation has a few different funding tracks where what they try to do is bring together educators that are working in the space in order to forward and kind of coordinate the work that's being done. And the BEST Center has been located in Northern California, and they bring together people that are working in facilities and HVAC and building controls and in sustainability in order to train the trainers in many ways and bring particularly community college instructors together so we can level up our skill, share knowledge, see examples of the best practice that's happening across the country, and then be able to bring that back inspirationally to our students. Because oftentimes it can be a little bit lonely teaching, particularly to community college. You've got a heavy course load. You're doing a lot of work with your students, and it's not always easy to find out and hear the inspiration. And that's it for me, is that Best is brought together inspiring folks and really East Coast, Midwest, Southeast, Northwest, West Coast together a couple of times a year to share inspiration, share best practices, and then be and in an open source model, aggregate and share that back out. And so they've had a number of different programs. I know that they're partnered with the Berkeley National Labs now, and do amazing jobs with building operators, facility managers, and instructors, teaching them more about sustainable building operations.
We've been talking about South Seattle College and the work you've been doing, but you also are involved in the certification program. Why don't you spend a little bit more time talking about that?
Sure. So I'm a professional teacher for the Building Operator Certification Program, and this is actually a nationwide program for building operators. It's got actually 3 different tiers of study. The first is called Fundamentals of Energy Efficient Building Operations, and that's for folks that maybe don't have their feet wet in the space, or maybe looking to transition into building operations. It's an opportunity. It's a short 6-part training course that allows them to understand basic energy efficient operations and also qualify to move them into the BOC Level 1. The BOC Level 1 is a training program that typically runs about once a month, runs for about 9 months, and is a series of courses that really prepare folks in order to be able to run their buildings more effectively and more efficiently. And it's widely recognized, often supported by utilities or by owners, where they'll pay folks to go through, and has demonstrated benefits that when people go through and get that certification, they save energy on the job. And so studies have been done, and it proves time and time again that it's a great opportunity. It also tends to qualify folks for additional incentives from the utilities, or in some places for to be able to act as experts under different municipal systems. And then there's the Building Operator Level 2. And that's kind of the capstone on it that really allows folks that once they get how to run the buildings in an energy efficient way, identify, contextualize, and present those opportunities to management. And they take a project on in their real buildings and present that through that study. And I know particularly in a number of the states that are developing these building performance standards, if you have your BOC Level 2, you can act as a qualified person or somebody that can actually sign off on the paperwork and the other things that's done that demonstrate that your building is doing what it needs to year over year in order to comply with the regulations.
Well, it seems to me, and probably seems to you as well, that it's a logical conclusion, therefore, that cities and municipalities that have these new building efficiency guidelines, that along with that, they have the prospect for building operators, facility managers, and those in that ilk, that those individuals should it becomes one of the carrots for those individuals, because a lot of the time nobody's going to hire somebody additional there if they're internally staffed. They need somebody that has that skill, and you stated that this is a nationwide certification. And where is that certification taught? Is it all online?
Well, it's taught regionally, so each region kind of has a different way of teaching it, and that you typically can find the modality that suits you best. There are online classes you can take, and there are in-person classes you can take. And it's what I've found, right, is it's kind of a schism. I don't find anybody that says, well, I take it or leave it. You're either one of the online folks or you're the in-person folks. But yeah, you can look it up. It's at theboc.info. And that, or you can typically check in your local area with some of your utilities and find out when it's being offered. I've taught classes here in the Northwest, in California, and in the Mountain West, and I've done that both in person and online. So it just kind of depends on how you prefer. Sometimes too, some owners or utilities will do a consolidated class, so they'll go in, get a cohort of folks, and just sit down for a week and kind of move through, or a couple of weeks and move through the curriculum.
Yeah. Okay. And that was valuable, because that at least helps more facility management people that are on this cast to understand that this is a certification that's out there that can be attained, and it's very relevant to the building operations standards that are coming up that we're seeing really across the country, and provides you the tools to be able to work with that and benefit from them the most, rather than have to fight it, have to be in a position of opposition to actually gain the benefits. Maybe that becomes that carrot. Great. Do you have any other things to add about that, or about the various associations that you've been involved in? Are there other associations that you have regular involvement in?
Yeah, there are some other associations that I do. The comment I'll make about that before I jump into those is that for owners or facility managers that are considering this, even if you are going to outsource some of that work, and oftentimes you do have to, if you're running pretty lean and your staff doesn't have lots of extra hours in the day, getting that training has a couple of big benefits. One, they understand, it demystifies the process. So when a vendor's bidding on it, they sort of can say, I'm not so sure about that, or you know what, I can go ahead and do that one myself. I can get the data in place. I can get this all ready here. I'll have you QA, QC and sign off on it, but I was able to do it. It really is one of the most cost-effective ways to, if you're looking at having to comply with these regulations, training up your staff in whatever certification program, whether you're getting a degree or getting a professional certification, makes an immense amount of sense for compliance. To other organizations, there's a number of other organizations that I've been involved with. I can say that I love IFMA. I love the International Facility Management Association. I'm not a current member. I regret to say, but I've been involved with their foundation, and I've been involved with a lot of their events, and they're just a fantastic organization. I also am regularly involved with the Association of Energy Engineers. They put on a national conference, an East and West conference, and then also with the with ASHRAE, it's the Association of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers. Those are the groups that I tend to hang out with. Probably, again, the reason that people accuse me of being an engineer from time to time.
I love it. Yeah, I was making some root assumption that you were going to be a big US GBC person. However, the work you're doing is directly related to all four of them.
Yeah, and this is one of those situations where I wish I could do it all. I was highly involved with the Green Building Council for the first half of my career, and really love the work that they're doing. As I've moved more to the operational side of the house, they still really have a core design focus there, and so I kind of had to choose where I was spending the time, and ended up kind of spending a little bit more time within the different commissioning and other organizations. The one more other organization I'll put a shout out for is the Building Commissioning Association, and that's a group that I've had extensive past involvement with. They're a great organization that kind of bridges that divide between the design and construction and operations.
Thank you for that. Is that a national entity?
It is a national entity. They also do run a national conference, and they have a national certification for commissioning providers called the CCP, or the Certified Commissioning Provider. So if you're looking for somebody to come in either in a new construction or a or retro commissioning, it's a great one of several strong standard certifications you might look for if you're looking for somebody to do that work.
Well, it never ceases to amaze me how many associations of every form and ilk are related to the built environment, and every individual that I have a conversation with in this realm, particularly on the Facilicast, I learn about another organization that I had no idea. I recall way back when I thought, oh, there are like 2 or 3 of them or so. Oh no, there are hundreds. It's ridiculous. Now, one of the challenges for the organization I'm involved in, which is the FM Pipeline, is in becoming the nexus of the next gen of FM, is ensuring that we knit enough of those great organizations together, they recognize here's a place where that talent might come from. And ultimately, I'd like to see some of that talent come your way as well, despite your primary programming being for returning adults. There is great opportunity with these tech-savvy green cleaning students coming forward. No question about that.
Well, that's huge, and that's the other part. It's about that. For me, it's about that lifelong education. These tech-savvy students that are going to be coming into our field in the next few years, in a handful of years, they're going to be the returning adult students that I get an opportunity to work with. So it's not too long before I definitely hope that they're going to be coming and giving me a shout. And that's the other part too, is sometimes it's helpful to give a shout to somebody that's had a little perspective and say, what would you have done when you were my age, or what does that outlook look for? Because I think that's one of the things we have a big opportunity to do, is to talk about what does 10 years, 20 years into the future look like, and why are these dynamic, satisfying, and lucrative jobs that we have in facility management, in facility operations.
Yeah, and I think you could probably also agree with ensuring that we use the best possible narrative for these really, really cool careers. You get to do something different every day. You're doing something that's really going to change the planet, change your world, have a direct impact on you. Get paid a few bucks for doing it too. Not all bad.
It's one of my favorite stories from somebody that's deeply entrenched in the smart buildings environment and has run, if you look up at any of those national leaders on the NASDAQ, has run their smart buildings programs at this point. And he said a few years ago, after building one of the largest smart building programs here at a software giant, just outside of Seattle, said, I go to a cocktail party and I'm a nation's leader in smart buildings, and I still think that my partner describes me as the janitor. So we absolutely do have a good opportunity to change and harness that narrative around what opportunities are there.
Yeah, that sounds really good. Steve Abercrombie, thank you so much for coming on to the Facilicast with us today, the liberal science of buildings. We're looking forward to hearing more from you, and our listeners will most certainly be reaching out. It has been a pleasure. Honored that you could be here, and may you all have a splendid day with the liberal science of buildings.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.